Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Brandon, we've got a great one tonight. How have you been doing?
Good. And great is an understatement. This is a conversation that if this one doesn't hit different, I don't know where. If this one doesn't hit different, we're probably not the right podcast for you.
Yeah, it's true.
Because honestly, I don't know that any podcast would be for you.
Right.
If this doesn't make you reflect and really, really appreciate,
take a little inventory of
100%. Yeah,
I'm with you. Vital Akimana is somebody that you all will hear. I came across in a chance meeting back in 2019. I was on a road trip for work, and as we often do, and Brandon, you do the same thing when you're traveling, is you got to go eat by yourself. And we're both people who like to talk to others. And I remember sitting down at a Hilton in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and we just started talking, casual conversation. And I don't know why, but it just, led into me asking him some questions about maybe his upbringing or what brought him to the United States, because he did mention that he was from Rwanda. And the story that you all will hear him tell tonight, he told me back in 2019, and it just blew you away. And so now watching his evolution from the young child who went through the atrocities that he will describe for you all tonight on the show, to somebody who is a public speaker. He's a talented facilitator. He's a master in healing arts. He's as we mentioned, a native of Rwanda, survivor of the genocide. He believes in positive change through holding space for physical and emotional trauma. He mentions his alma mater of Guilford College, where he studied comparative religion and peace studies. But he's also a certified mediator, a facilitator that does a lot of work with conflict resolution at Guilford College. And he is a certified end-of-life counselor. I mean, the list goes on and on. Some of the work he's doing with student organizations. So
what he is an amazing, just an amazing human being.
Yeah, that probably would have been better. The listeners
line.
Are like, why couldn't Brandon have just done this intro? Because that
well, no, it's just literally you could go on and on with his accolades and what he's accomplished, and it wouldn't even, all of those things don't even begin to scratch what he is in terms of a faithful, servant leader that is just, it's one of those guys that you wish you just you had more of those kind of people in your life.
He's going to be somebody like Damon, when we had Damon West on, some of those people who, there's just certain people that when you hear their stories, they are pulling you up. They're They're going to force you to elevate yourself if you are breathing, right? If you are somebody,
if you'll be vulnerable and allow them to be the change agent that they are.
Yes.
And I don't mean to use that as because I know that's Damon's book, and Vital will talk about that a little bit as well. These are change agents. Yes. And I just would hope and pray that the listeners will just open up and be vulnerable and let what he's talking about actually impact them, because it will only impact them for the better.
And guys, after you listen to this podcast, you're going to want to, I promise you, learn a little bit more about him or find out where you can find some information. So you can go to vitalakimana.com. It's vitalakimana.com. But then also, we reference in this interview a Washington Post article by Courtland Milloy that was entitled "A Peacemaker Who Knows the Horror of War." You can find that online. And then his story was also featured in Howard Ross's best-selling book, Our Search for Belonging, which you can find on Amazon. 2 places that you can find that. But, I'm so excited for you all to hear this. As Brandon mentioned, if you stay open and vulnerable about this, this will no doubt be one of those interviews that changes you. And so, without further ado, get your pen and paper ready. Here is Vital Akimana. Well, as you all heard from the introduction there, we have a really amazing guest that's not a stranger to me necessarily. Vital Akimana is somebody that I had the pleasure of meeting a long time ago. Well, it's a long time ago now. It was back in, I think, 2019 at a hotel in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Our paths crossed. I was down there for a work trip and he was down there for a work trip. And we just struck up a conversation. As you all know by now, as listeners to this podcast, there's not a lot of strangers, as you can imagine, that I meet. And we just started
strangers
talking.
And not enough air in the room sometimes.
So it's but it's one of those things that, Vital, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. We really do appreciate you joining us. And it's like I told you on the phone yesterday, that was a conversation that has lasted a long time with me. So it must have been a good one.
I'm honored, John. I'm truly honored to be here. I'm grateful, Brendan, for you all just creating a nice environment for me to come and hang out with you all.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. I want to, just for the listeners' sake, kind of reflected back on, so when we had this conversation about all of the atrocities that you were experienced as a young child from Rwanda, and somebody who observed the genocide, and we'll get into some of that and how you and your family fled the country after 800,000 people were slaughtered during the 100 days of bloodletting, and just an absolutely amazing story. But I wanted to, just to orient the listeners, is share a little bit of an excerpt. At the time, there was no blogs or anything that I was involved in, so I was using Facebook as that kind of an outlet. And I was thinking, Vital, this is something that you have never been privy to, so you'll be hearing this for the first time as well. But this was just a little excerpt of how I described this interaction that I had with you back in 2019. This was the next day I put on Facebook, and I talked about this encounter that you and I had as a God moment. I said it was a chance encounter I had that I would honestly categorize as one of the most powerful moments of my life. At the time, I described it as a God moment, those times where God is directly or indirectly working on us or through us. After about an hour of conversation that you and I had, and we talked for probably a couple of hours, but after an hour of conversation, I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you the question is, so what's your American dream? What's your goal in life? And you said, I just want to be a part of helping people unlock their full potential. Now, this was what struck me about this, was that after hearing the story that you're going to share with us here in a minute, here it was, you're somebody who was forced out of your home when you were just a small child. You had witnessed lots of death and unspeakable sights that no person should have to see in their whole lifetime. You go through life wondering why you were spared. We'll talk about that here in a minute as well. While hundreds of thousands of people who were just like you, some of them even family and friends, were not spared. And after all that, and your family, you and your family had been through, literally being on the brink of your own deaths on numerous occasions, your purpose, your why was to serve others. And it just struck me as such a powerful thing. And so that's what I kind of want to, I bring that up so that we can start there, because if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share with the listeners just your journey, your family's journey over to the United States and how that all came to be, because I think it's fascinating.
Thank you, John. It's a very long story, so I want to be mindful of people and their time.
Yes.
You can, let me know if we need to fast forward a little bit. But
sure.
Really, even the war that I shared with you, the genocide of 1994, that was my third war. I had been in war since I was 6. The first war that I encountered in Rwanda, 1990-91, was when the beginning of the end, really, for our way of life at that time. It was back then when I was 6. So within the first war, it more or less felt like two armies going one after another. And we happened to be right next door to a military base. In the beginning, they were saying, the Rwandan security forces are fighting a rebel group. And we honestly thought it was Uganda that was coming to invade Rwanda, until we realized, oh no, there are other Rwandans who have been exiled, who have been, outside of this country, that want to come back so bad they will take arms to do it. And so you fast forward, Rwanda enters a peace negotiation between the rebel and the national government. And the multi-party system in Rwanda expands, so now people can actually choose their own political parties. The rebels actually managed to gain a foothold within Rwanda and enter government. And then at the same time, my mother comes out as an activist. So between 1992 to late 1993, 94, early, we're being targeted by extremist groups. Like, think, your KKK on crack.
Right.
And, we had moved at least 13 times before the genocide of 1994, which I'm going to share with you all about. And so come 1994, this is April, my mother had basically stowed my sister and I away in Congo. And there's a problem when you're like refugees in the Congo.
Wow.
So the same place that you're hearing about in the news, places where Courtland and cobalt comes from, that's in our storage devices, the same place, that was where we were hiding from our would-be murderers. And we come back to Rwanda in April 5th, I believe. My mom came and got us. We had spent 3 months in the Congolese school system, bullied, teased. Because these kids had nothing. I witnessed the Congo society collapsing under Mobutu. Didn't understand what was going on. You could see a guy with a suitcase full of money, put it on the counter of a grocery store, and walk out with just, potatoes. So we leave Congo, and we're happy to. We come back. It was like Easter weekend, and my mom and dad had separated. So we're going to stay with my father, and my siblings were going to school, and they were staying with my dad already. So we arrived April 5th. We picked up things from our old home that by now the extremists had overran, and, had killed pets and chickens and whatnot. We go to the capital city where my father and my siblings are, my 2 oldest brothers. So my sister and I arrive with my mother, who promptly drops us off because she has to continue to do activist work and agricultural work in the South. April 6th is basically the night of the collapse. The plane that was carrying the president of Rwanda at the time is rocketed, and it comes down right over his house as it's descending into the airport. On that airplane is the president of Burundi and the top military official. And so basically, imagine if the secretary of the armed forces and the president, the chief, and the commander in chief are taken out in one night.
Wow.
The amount of chaos that exploded April 6th, April 7th, that morning, early in the morning, was catastrophic. Bullets of like different colors, flying and whizzing by our house. By this time, my mom is left. So we are with my dad, who is unbelievably strict. So we are ducking, and we know this, this is how it goes in war. We get into the corridor of the main house. We hide there for 2 weeks. My father is making sure that 4 kids, who are now seasoned by war, mind you, remain safe. And then the national radio within about a week calls and say, basically, my mother has been found and she's been killed because she's an activist, and they wanted to debilitate her, anyone who had ever followed her. We find out 6 months later that that wasn't true, but for 6 months, we're living with the reality. Mom's not coming back home. We are with our dad, and that's just a new reality. And we just need to figure out how to survive from day to day, because our house is literally about a hill under the presidential residence and the home of the Republican Guards, like the heaviest weapons. We had ordinances that landed in our backyard that didn't explode, luckily. And then another announcement will come from the national radio. We need people to go out, clear shrubberies, bushes, because the rebels might be hiding there. My father and my 2 older siblings went out. Gunfire. They're being shelled at, have to duck quickly. We thought they weren't going to come back. So now, even for a brief period, now it's my sister and I thinking, this is us. This is it. So fast forward another week or so later, my dad receives a word from our neighbor, who, this guy was so strange. I mean, he was gardening in the middle of war. But I think that was just a way to keep sanity. Like, think about the things you had to do during COVID to just maintain your sanity. After a while, I mean, your brain capacities diminish the more trauma you're exposed to. So you're already experiencing the pre-effect of post-traumatic stress, but you're still in the stressor environment. You're thinking fight or flight. And all of these are going through us. And then our neighbor comes and said, the convoys have been coming. They've already rounded up enough people. They are looking for you. You are on at least 4 different death lists.
Oh my goodness.
Military, the police, the militia, and thugs that are just looking for money. And we are on the list because of my mother. We're on the list because they've managed to eliminate all her party officials. So she was part of a Democratic Party that was responsible for farmers. And so this extremist group that was like super, the most heinous individuals, they were called Interahamwe. They had trained with machetes and Katyushas. They had kids with AK-47. It was a wild world. And so our neighbors saying, those are the people that are going to be coming to find you all. We've managed to hold them off by telling them, oh, that family, that's a rich family. You need to go further up in the hill.
Yeah.
And then weird things like our number being turned upside down, the things that you really hear about in movies, that was our life. That's what saved us. But those neighbors in particular, right? These people that my father had made a relationship with that were our community, they were letting us know, here's where the danger is, get out. So my father comes to us and says, pack only the things you can carry on your back, disheveled clothes, put mud on yourself. And he himself, he used to wear, a clean shaven man.
Right.
He was the head of discipline. And in Rwanda, we were in the Catholic school system, and those nuns were not messing around.
Right.
And so it was indoctrinated in us that you must appear a certain way, clean cut, short hair. I guess that's where my hair went. Never grew back. And so my father, who was responsible for making sure that message went into the students, now has to do something counter his own nature. Remove the suit or the button-up shirt, make himself look like literally the hobo in the street, and removes his glasses, his spectacle, as he would call it, and tell my oldest brother, now you're going to have to be my eyes, because if I put my glasses on, they're going to think I'm an intellectual and we're dead.
Wow.
And so
you're how old at this time? You're like 9, 8, 9?
I turned 10 in the middle of the war. And so my dad says, we're going to our home village. His home village is 96 miles from the capital city, by the way. So we walked almost 4 days to be able to get to his home village. And within the first day, we passed at least 20 roadblocks from the capital, from where we live to the outskirts of the capital city. Each one of them could have murdered us 1,000 times over. These 2 weeks, we had been seeing literally bodies in the back of dump trucks. And I don't want to be too graphic for anybody listening to all of this, but it was hell on earth. And really, some even depiction that I've seen in Hollywood of what hell looks like wonders compared to what we were going through at that time. It was a total collapse of the system. Infrastructure is gone. There is no one who is in power that's looking out for you. If you are in Telehamne, you're good. If you are an extremist, you're great. But if you are on any bit of the target list or even look remotely similar to those they're looking for, you were a goner. And
they were just killing people, like, no question. It was kill, then ask questions, right? I mean, it was not even a lot of times it was, but I mean, I remembered you telling me one of the things, those roadblocks were,
yes.
I just remember being so intense, a part of your story, because I remember them asking you all questions like, are you Mundi? Yeah. Are you like, they were asking you like, which
Hutu
tribe
or Tutsi?
Yes. Yeah, or
Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. Those are the three groups in Rwanda. And again, it's the roadblocks by ranking. The military roadblock is going to ask you your name first, because even before the genocide began, they were systematically eliminating intellectuals, politicians, anyone who was going to oppose their final solution. Mm-hmm. And then you move to the police roadblocks. Then they're looking at your ethnicity makeup. And Rwandan ethnicities are all pseudo-ethnicities. They're not really real. These are created probably at the time of the Germans and Belgians, solidified in the Belgian system, where we were actually issued a card. But the Rwandans are actually part of a larger mother tribe called Bantu. And the Bantu mother tribe has at least 500 language groups. The Bantus that made it in Rwanda spoke the same language, prayed to the same gods, may have had a variation of different ancestral worship before the European came, and then before Christianity was introduced. By the time Christianity is introduced, really by the time of 1994 even, it's 97% a Christian nation, right? Mm. So maybe 1% Muslim, and then the other, like 2% other. So the whole idea of like, and this is why there was indiscriminate killing, because like, how are you going to tell a difference between John and Brandon if you all are like stripped down, wearing the same clothing, you are in the same scenario, and they're going to say, okay, John, I mean, he comes from this region, he must be this. Brandon comes from this region, he must be this. When the UN War Crimes Tribunal interviewed some of the killers and asked them, how accurate were you in assessing who it is that you were killing, whether they were Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa? They had a 30% accuracy. So, which means like you erred 70% of the time and killed the wrong people, even if it was the agenda. It's wrong to just kill, period. But if you're going after someone and you have a 70% failure rate to get them, this is the degree of insanity that was occurring in Rwanda at this time. So now my family has the unfortunate experience of being half Tutsi, half Hutu. You have them on both sides. This was an unfortunate, really identity to have, because not only would they accuse you of being Tutsi, which was who they were hunting for primarily, but they're also going to say your family that's Hutu has aided and abetted Tutsi agendas. And then they're going to say, oh, wait, your mother is Marianne. Okay, she's an activist. She's not only a Hutu Tutsi, but she's abated agendas of also the rebel government. that's wanting to fight the national government. So either way you sliced it, these roadblocks could get us for our political affiliation, for the pseudo ethnicity, for really what region we came from. And that's what we had to make our way through for at least the first 20 roadblocks in the capital city. Now, that's just 10 miles. Now we still have 86 miles. Imagine the longest walk you've ever taken and multiply by 1,000 times. That's the degree of difficulty of my family getting to my dad's home region. Now we get to my dad's home region. I'm sparing you a lot of details from seeing our family friends die. How many people in the groups that we were traveling with were stopped at every roadblock? How many execution-style killings? All of this. I will spare you that travel to my dad's home region. And we're thinking this is the safest place we can be. It's 20 miles from the largest killing field. Literally the place where they'll take people to create a mass grave, line you up, fire on you, and just bulldoze things over. We hid there. And my father, I can't forget what he said, you're going to be with your cousins, and these are farm boys. There's shepherd boys. I want you to cuss as worse as they do, be filthier than they are. If someone, just be like, pretend you are so ignorant that even your cousins don't want to be next to you. And that's the way to ward off anyone from even hinting that you come from an educated family, that you are half Hutu or half Tutsi. You must present to them an image that basically saves you. And what saves you is, don't approach me. I'm dirty, I'm filthy. And in fact, even the shepherd boy doesn't want to hang out with me.
Wow.
And so
do you remember? I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, do you remember, as a child, do you remember getting to the village and feeling a sense of relief? Like, okay, we've at least made it, or is it just total chaos all the time?
The village itself was occupying this really weird world where farmers still went out, but then you would see military convoy pass once in a while. This is like a forgotten region of Rwanda. It was so forgotten that the national politicians would probably imagine listing all the counties in your respective states. And that last one, they're like, oh, we forgot. And that one too. That's the county that we lived in, right? Okay. You go past the boonies and then keep going, basically.
Okay.
And this is where they had also created this large killing field because no one was going to go look there, right? And so farmers are still going about their business, but they are suspected to be exactly who the government wants us to keep alive, right? They're Hutu farmers that we don't need to mess with them. They don't have guns, they don't have weapons. Maybe if, we want grain, we'll go to them, but that's it. So, but I remember specifically, our family was never at ease. If my cousins or my uncle suspected that a military convoy was approaching, we are quickly stowed away in a hole that was big enough to fit 4 of us. And then they'll put a reed carpet over where we are, and basically we're hidden until there's an all clear. And so that was our life. And then we'll come back, and middle of the night was really when it was comfortable to speak or talk about anything with any of the family members there, because for them, it was dangerous for us to be there. They would have been safe otherwise, but for that family to be with them, the ones that they're looking for, not just for political reasons, but for the ethnicity, goners. So I remember we stayed there another 5 months or so. And then finally, my dad called us once. So someone came to get us from the field. We run back and they said, your father basically wants you to come. So he sat us down, and it was unusual because he was turning on this little British radio with like an antenna that would broadcast a signal that he would pick up from the Congo or Rwanda or the national news. and we heard my mother's voice. And she's speaking in, I guess, either in Congo or Uganda or maybe the capital city. And basically, it was like Lazarus rising.
Right.
I can't quite explain to you. Like even now, I still get goosebumps because there's what tells you that it's your mom, right? You know the frequency of her voice, and you know the cadence and the rhythm that is unmistakable. And suddenly on this national broadcast, my mother's coming on, and she had connected with UN, and they're basically asking her to help coordinate farmers because farmers believed in her, and that it would be a morale boost for certain people for her to be heard on the radio. And she's basically coordinating people from moving out of these dangerous zones. So 6 months in, the world finally starts to pay attention, and French troops, Belgian troops, Germans, etc., they're coming in and trying to create zones of ceasing hostility.
Yeah.
We were still in basically a red zone. And my mom is coordinating refugees to not go to the Congo, but to a different region. And by now, the refugee crisis in the Congo is just through the roof. The camps in the Congo, I'm so grateful we never made it because the horror stories of those make even my story seem like it's nothing. The people who ended up in the refugee camp, I mean, that my heart continues to go out for them. There, we managed to stop because we couldn't cross. And
how long is it before from that time when you hear your mother's voice and then you ultimately make it to where you finally, like, where's that point, to Brandon's point earlier about making it to a village, but where is that point where you finally can exhale and say, oh, okay.
This is probably going to be another week or two later. So my mother, in that radio announcement that was kind of replayed, at the end of it said, and if my family is still alive, I will find you and I will bring you to safety. And that was just like music to our ears. And so we're waiting. And sure enough, probably about a week later, these two mysterious strangers just pop out of nowhere in this town that I said is past the boonies. They have no business being there because they look odd. And they hand my dad a note and then vanish. And then probably another week later or so, my dad is waking us up probably 3 a.m. in the morning and say, we gotta go. And we're like, what in the world? I mean, the cows usually get up maybe 5 or 6. So why are we leaving this early? And so we can't question my dad. My dad's word is law. And so we get going and it's cold as hell. And these guys are with him, these same guys that were looking completely out of place. And they're basically leading us through the village, from the village to the jungles, from the jungles through series of roads and little network. It's like the Underground Railroad where we didn't even know existed. There'll be times where like dawn is coming and you see finally a guy's head pop out of the grass. It was like this like SEAL Team 6 probably experience where these guys are just popping out of nowhere, communicating briefly by signal, and then they're gone. You're like, was there a human ever there? And so these networks that the rebel groups had created eventually lead to the zone that was fortified by the rebels. And by now the rebels are gaining ground. They have taken over the capital city and basically liberating different areas. And then my mom, we approach this heavily fortified complex, and literally this kid with an AK-47 is posted outside of my mother's like area. We didn't know my mother was there. And then my mom comes out, and I mean, there is nothing that like you will never experience until you've experienced seeing your mother come back to life. And you thought she was gone.
It's unbelievable.
And so we have I remember we had Coca-Cola and catfish That was like, and that's when we were like breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
But even still, the buildings that we're in, that they're housing us, have been shelled to death. There, I mean, there's no hiding the fact that war has taken place. They are still, bodies that are not collected from the pathway to the capital city where we eventually arrived back. And they're belongings of people strewn about. Everything we had passed in those 96 miles of walking. I mean, what was remaining was either rotting flesh, items that were once important to someone, and they lost them and lost their life with it. And then that was it. So the rebel government eventually ordered my mom to come to the U.S. as part of the diplomatic corps. They gave her an option to either be in the agriculture ministry or something else they decide. And my mom, having seen maybe like 3 of her superiors in that ministry gone, was like, I can't do that. So we eventually arrived to the U.S. And then probably within 2 or 3 months, my mom, who, again, forever the activist, really, you should have her on this show, finds that the acting ambassador is embezzling funds, attempts to report him. And because he was a war man and very well-to-do, we are not believed. So we become homeless here in the U.S. Because we came as part of the diplomatic corps, we did not have the access to like refugee fund that most people usually have. Like usually it's like Catholic ministries or Lutheran family services that will bring you and make sure you're okay. But no, we were dumped on the streets of the U.S. On almost like scandal for the State Department. And finally, someone in the State Department is like, no, we got to take care of this family. They gave my mom a stipend for 1 month and helped her get a place for us to stay. And then we just rebuilt from homelessness. But that was not the first time we would be homeless, because by maybe 2 or 3 years, 2 years in, it's just too much for my mom. And then we lose that house and have to basically live like, or at least 2 weeks we were in the car until a friend of ours took care. So the experience of even leaving Rwanda to come to the U.S., when we finally got to the U.S., we thought, oh my gosh, we've made it. Here comes the land of milk and
silver
honey.
lining. Yeah,
exactly. We've made it. And war is a terrible thing. Corruption is a terrible thing. I think it's war and corruption is terrible. Everybody will get impacted by it. And to get a double whammy, being in the U.S., it was just, that one shattered our mind. Yeah. I would say the way I describe it is like leaving Rwanda 1994 alive, period, is like crossing Mount Everest and coming back, and you're good. Managing to survive the U.S. after being homeless twice, that's like adding another 2 or 3 Mount Everest.
Right.
Navigating the weird political experiences of being in the U.S. from like xenophobia, racism, whatever you call the ism, and trying to understand as an African who doesn't speak the language,
right,
the world you're navigating. You might as well be doing a free solo climb of 3 Mount Everest and hope that you'll get back down safely. Honestly, it's like the grace of God that delivered my family. That's the only thing I can attribute it to. Well, but also resiliency.
And I'm glad you bring this up because, in 2006, there's an article in the Brown Daily Herald. You're 20 years old at this point. I think you were on campus to speak. The article is about survivor recounts Rwandan genocide. And this is 10 years, I guess, after you had, your family had come to the United States. And I think it was around the film. I think they were doing like a screening sometimes in April, which is I mean, I would highly encourage anybody. I've seen that. I saw that movie actually after you and I talked, but I would encourage anybody to go and look for that movie online. It's written by Raoul Peck, a Haitian-born filmmaker. But there was something in this article that I wanted to ask you about, because you said in the article, Rwandans died because of ignorance. I hear the voices of the dead urging me to make meaning of their lives. I live for them. I am speaking for them now as I speak to you. And I was thinking, Vital, where did that come from, in the sense of I'm so impressed with how you were at 20, how you were at 10 or 11, because you had to mature, you had to grow up so fast, seeing things nobody should ever see, even as an 80-year-old, much less a 10-year-old. But was that from your mom and dad, throughout the whole process, just feeding this right mindset with all of this? It seems like there's this this ability to just continue to move forward, ability to, that no matter what you all were facing, that resilience, that had to come from somebody. Was that something that they were constantly, as you look back, thinking how much your mother was reinforcing it, even when you were here and you were homeless, that there's something that has to be continuing to pump positivity into you?
I think at the core of it is there is no teaching resilience, there's embodying it. My mother is my greatest hero, someone who escaped a concentration camp, literally death squads, goons, police, military trying to kill her, and land on her feet, escaped to three countries, and then managed to get an entire family into the United States. She's my hero.
Right.
I mean, put Iron Man down, Captain America on the side, Wonder Woman. I respect all of these characters, but my mother is the greatest being I've ever encountered. Not only to thank her for the fact that she gave me life. So my mother embodies the quality of resilience. Really, her nickname when she was an activist was Mkombozi. It's Swahili for contender. If you remember the Rumble in the Jungle, and she's Muhammad Ali. That's my mom. Yes. You put a 300-pound guy in front of her, and he's between her and the farmers making potatoes. That guy is going to be gone. Okay. So you tell my mom that you have a family that you've brought and you're responsible for in the U.S., and they're homeless and they're going to need to thrive. My mom worked effortlessly to make sure that we didn't have anything that we were looking at other people for. She navigated the language, which was her third or fourth language at this point. Wow. Managed to understand social services and what it is that was available to us. And then she managed to get us on point. My mother was the embodiment of resiliency. She's not coming and giving you a side coaching and saying, hang in there. She's doing it. She's saying, do as I do. And this is the way of my mother tribe, the Bantu people that I tell you the Rwandans come from. Mm-hmm. These people have survived wars, calamities, natural disasters. They've tamed jungles. Okay. So we come from a hardy stock, and there's a saying in the Bantu people, I am because we are. I'm human because of other human beings. My existence is predicated on my mother's existence, predicated on my father's existence, predicated on the generations that gave birth to them. It is knowing that wisdom, that knowledge, that I would say probably fed what you read at Brown University. No one was feeding me those words. It was my ancestors being present with me and saying, now you're at a decision point. You can wallow in survival guilt. You have every reason why to distrust a human being, and you've been beaten down more times than you can imagine. Okay. You've gone toe to toe with Mike Tyson and you lost terribly, but you're still one of ours, and our blood, the same blood that flows through them, flowed through me. And if they could conquer a jungle, if they can thrive where empires fell, if they could navigate from the Niger Delta all the way down to Rwanda, what's the hang up right now for me, right? And that it requires thinking deeper and reaching deeper within yourself to be able to reach that resilience, to reach this point where you say, I'm not only going to just survive, I'm going to thrive. And because I'm thriving, I'm also carrying the stories of the people that didn't make it. Right. So that was what was happening to me at Brown University. I was aware that I'm at Guilford College. I have an opportunity for a college education where even the kids that I grew up in for Washington, Maryland, a good 40% of them never made it. Right. So now I'm like, think about them. And then you add the third grade class in Rwanda, half of whom never made it.
Wow.
Right. Another quarter of whom I don't even know how they thrive in this today's like experience in the world. And maybe 1% of them may have gotten an exposure to an education outside of the borders of Rwanda. Right. So for me, I was present with the fact that when I speak, I can't just speak as just Vital. Like I'm speaking for my friend Henry who died. I'm speaking for all those kids in Fort Washington. Like so, I'm speaking and I'm present with the fact that there's something to be shared about them. I'm not alone in this, and I have to thrive. I have to not just survive.
Well, I think you've also made it your life's, it's interesting to see how you've evolved with this purpose in life. And one of the things later in a Washington Post article, you had asked the question over and over. You said you would ask yourself, why did I survive when 300,000 children just like me did not? But you mentioned in there, and this is going to segue, I think, into this next chapter of this show, is you mentioned your vision is to use your skills as a leader and mediator to guide our generation to a place and time when we can embrace our diversity instead of being divided by it.
Yeah.
And I also think, Vital, this kind of leads into, Howard Ross. For those of you who have read the book, Our Search for Belonging, How Our Need to Connect is Tearing Us Apart. If you've not read that book, I've been fortunate enough to read the book. But if you've not read that book, I would, again, encourage you to read that, because I think it's interesting that you think back to the genocide, you think back to some of those divisions that were there, and how you now have, as the listeners heard during the introduction, you are, doing things with colleges where you're a facilitator. You are somebody who teaches about conflict resolution. You're somebody who teaches about, DEI, division, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, inclusion. You've now made it, like all of these things that you had that vision as a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old even, you've now you've been doing this for a while. Where was it along the line? Was it at 17 or 20 where you decided this is going to be my purpose? We talk about the purpose that Howard Ross talks about in The Search for Belonging, but where was that? Do you remember a moment where you were like, I got to change this. I got to do something about this, because what is happening is not something I want to be a part of. I want to be that change maker.
So even the words change agent came to me 16, 17. I was one of the youth building bridges program that Howard Ross was on the advisory committee. So they were responsible for bringing kids from, counties in Maryland, counties in Virginia and DC. And basically we're going to this 3-day retreat to understand how to communicate differences, how to reach out across a group of people that I don't belong to talk about what is an ism, what is a fabric of oppression, how are we running through this world with unconscious bias, how can we show up as allies. So it was these youth building bridges program that began to kind of plant a few seeds. But again, already I have in mind, I remember when I came to the US, even in my 5th grade class, I went to the counselor's office and she was talking about mediation. She came into our class and then I went to her office. I'm like, how do I study to be a mediator? I remember this just clear, because I was like, if 2 parties could come to a table and talk, was that possible for us in Rwanda? Could that be possible for other places around the world that are experiencing warfare? And then that expanded. It only expanded later, right? So now imagine I'm in Fort Washington, Maryland, and I'm like, my brother got carjacked at least 2 times. My high school, my like shoes got slashed by kids who were like, they could take your Nikes, and they don't even know where you come from or what has been happening to you. And it was clear that like the same kind of energy of, really not recognizing, understanding the other was present even in the U.S. And it's upon seeing this othering, this demonization of people, this greed and hunger that being in survival situation creates in people, that for me made it like something about it has to change. What is it that I'm capable of? And I had studied the mediation from the elementary school, and by the time I'm in high school, I'm like leader of the diversity workshop program, and then doing this youth building bridges program, and then finally I got a scholarship to go to the National Student Leadership Conference, which is where I work as a facilitator now. And they're like, "You're a change agent," and I'm like, "What does that mean?" Like these buzzwords from times gone. They're like, it's within your hands. Like, if you can muster up the integrity and will to be able to reach out, you have a responsibility to humanity. And then it signaled that Bantu philosophy again. I am because we are. Okay, if I have the capacity, skills as an orator, as a speaker, how can I utilize these skills to inspire? How can I teach about empathy? How can I teach about resilience? How can I teach about belonging? That's where the inspiration came from. And so that article by Courtland Milloy, by the time that comes along, where the beginning of the speaking career began at 17, I have in mind, like, I'm here because my people existed, because suffering exists in this world. And I have agency and a capacity to be able to affect it. And I remember Dr. King's quote, people fear each other because they've not been properly introduced to one another. And I was going to do my best to like bridge these gaps. If I can bridge the gap between, a KKK member and a Black Panther Party member, how do I do that? And Guilford College also became an incredible playground of understanding how to do this, because they literally had Bobby Seale and an ex-Grand Cyclops of the KKK sitting. And I'm like, wait a minute, this world is possible. And then to see like through the different like series of speakers that they'll bring, they even brought Mikhail Gorbachev. And I'm like, there's a place where a card-carrying member of the Communist Party can come and talk, and no one who is like, experiencing capitalism and democracy is going to like egg him, throw a tomato at him. Okay, I need to understand what I need to do to be able to like bring about that world in the places that matter to me, in Rwanda, in Fort Washington, Maryland. But then I realized that really what was important is like to bring it to the kids my age, right? And this is where for me was such a critical period, because I was also experiencing my father going through extreme mental illness. And I'm like asking myself, is that my fate? Do I go through that as well? So it expanded, because I was like, I don't know how much time I have until what got my dad gets me. So I'm just going to pour it all out, as much as I have left.
Yeah. You made me think about the Gandhi quote of be the change you wish to see in the world, right? It's the and this is so fascinating to me, because the listeners have heard me say this a lot on this show, is I'm a big believer that life is about all these choices that we have. Anybody who came through the experiences you did at a very young age, watched your mother go through what she went through, watched your father go through, watched your family, watched everybody in your country go through what they went through. There very easily, and I'll bet you we could find them if we looked hard enough, are people who had those same experiences you did, who are leading such a hardened life right now, that are bitter, that are angry, that are pissed off at the world, are never recovered from any of the things that they have observed. And then there's individuals like yourself who see all of that hardship, come to America, this land that's supposed to be so amazing, and they get here and they're right back in a bad situation, but the homelessness and all that. All of those things could have led you down a road of being like mad at the world, mad at God, whatever the case may be. But you made a choice that I'm going to be the change agent. I'm going to be the change I wish to see in the world. And that's what's so inspiring, I think, to me, and should be for the listeners as well, is that when we have those moments in life where things are happening to us, we always talk about it's the response. How do you respond is going to equal your outcome in life. So you have things that are happening to you. How you choose to respond to those things is going to equal your outcome. And for you, you chose to respond in a very positive way and really looked back at, and I think this is where the impression on a young 8, 9, 10-year-old child is that you saw and were wise enough at that young age to see this conflict that's going on in your country and recognizing this is something that could be changed. Like, this is just people who aren't seeing each other for what they really are, have difference of opinions. And instead of this conflict being here and escalated, it could have been, if somebody had been that mediator, then we could have maybe fixed some of this. And that's what I think is so cool about your story, is just the fact that you are like, look, Brandon.
Number one, I mean, I'm literally speechless, and anybody that knows me would tell you that's almost unbelievable. The role, though, what I think is important, and what I'm hearing, John, from both of you about the decision-making process, though, is there was this leadership, there was this relational leadership through your mom and dad. You saw them doing the things that you ultimately decided were important. But, there was something you also said at the beginning of this that kind of keeps resonating, is that 97% of your country at the time had a Christian background or a thread, and I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's Christianity, Islam, whatever the religion is. There's something about hope and faith that just, it's that mustard seed. If I just have a little hope and faith, I can take on the next thing. And you're also, not only do you have that underlying just spiritual component, but you're seeing the living embodiment of that in your home, or whatever, the home is wherever you are, right? With your family, you're seeing it day in and day out. And it's just, I'm just touching the surface. It doesn't surprise me, the level of greatness that you have achieved, knowing where you came from. You are incredible, and your story is amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing it.
Thank you, Brandon. What you touched upon, Rwanda is both the wars of Rwanda are both my toughest moments, but the culture of Rwanda is my greatest teacher. Mm-hmm. That even like in the naming ceremony, Vitari, Akimana, you're named to be given a pathway in life. And so that existed for me too, that it shaped who I was to be named my name, Vital, vital, that which is essential to life. Akimana, from God. It was just a reminder. Don't forget, like, the life that you have is divine. like that's important too. That's a very important component that fills me with hope, right? It gives me an opportunity. I can surrender, that there's some force that can make sense of the stuff that's happening to me right now, even if it's utter stupidity and makes no sense to me, right? So it's important. And then to move along with the gratitude that out of that insanity, you are alive. Your third grade class member is not. You are alive. Be grateful for the life that you have, right? That are around you in any given moment, there's 1,000 things you have an opportunity to be grateful for. I used to do a meditation with 14 shards of rock that I had thrown in a fire, that like it was a rock that I threw in a fire with an intention that it exploded and had like 14 shards. I made it a gratitude meditation that every day I would take, at least for each one of those rocks, I was going to name something that I had an abundance of that I was grateful for. So the first 5 are like mundane, easy. I'm grateful for oxygen. I can breathe. I'm grateful for sunlight. It's shining down on me. I'm grateful for fresh air, etc. But then after like the first 5, you get to the next 5. Then you have to really search. Like, I woke up this morning and I had clothes. Right? That I could change into that was different from the clothes I wore yesterday to go to school. There was kids that I grew up with in the Congo, those 3 months that we were there hiding for our would-be murderers, that had to share clothing with their siblings in order for their siblings to go to school. In the AM, they will have clothing. The older student will go. In the afternoon, the younger student would go to class and they will switch shirts. So I remember this, right? And so there's a sense of gratitude that I also have of the things that I have to remember. Their sense of faith is critical, and hope, right? What is in your spirituality? What's going to sustain you when your own reason can't? What's going to sustain you when your institution have literally crumbled? When the pandemic hit, it was like, oh, this is but my third apocalypse. I think I'm okay. Right. So, right.
Yeah.
For most people, I don't recommend that unless if you've been through like war and genocide. But for me, the pandemic was like, okay, this might look like an apocalypse, but really the apocalypse is a great unveiling. For me, it was an unveiling. Here's another opportunity that you have to transcend the gravity of doubt and fear that you have in you and just be human. Can you show up for others? Can you show up for yourself? Can you show up for the things that you're grateful for having?
And where's my opportunity and all that? Go ahead, Brandon.
I was just going to say, what I love though there, John, is too, with that faith, and the word that really jumps out at me there is the surrender. Because when you're in those situations, and I can't even pretend to know how you handle that, but when you're in those situations, if you think that you have any control at all, it could literally drive you crazy. And I think that surrender is such a huge piece, because once you've surrendered and you realize, to your point, hey, I'm waking up today and yeah, I have clothes and I have food. I have anything. Like the fact that you wake up, be grateful for that opportunity to wake up and be curious that day. That's number one. Like, and you don't have to have control. As a matter of fact, it's actually kind of nice to not have that underlying current where you feel like you have to control everything. But it's just, man,
but the ego is smart, right? The ego will make you think you have that control. But
God will always let you know that you don't, right? As soon as that ego gets smart, God will remind you, hey, you're not quite as smart as you think you are.
Yeah.
Right. And you need me. You're going to need to lean into me. Again, whatever God it is, you're going to have to learn to lean into me to move past whatever this challenge is that is today. Right. It's beautiful, man. I'm going to be up for a while. Like just.
Hey, I told you. I mean, look, it's why however many years later, I'm still thinking about the conversation at the Hilton in Virginia Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Change agent doesn't even begin to describe what you are. Okay?
I agree with that.
I want you to understand that you have stripped all ego out of when you say change agent. There isn't an ounce of ego in that, because you are so much more than that.
Yeah, if that was a vanity tag you were getting ready to get on your car, let's go ahead and fix that one now.
Just move on. Let's go somewhere else with it.
Well, Vital, look, I know one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, we're not going to have time tonight, but it's going to give us a good excuse to bring you back on, is the work you are doing with diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we talked, you and I did, about that intersection between that and mental illness that's happening in our country right now. And we've got definitely, I mean, one thing that COVID is kind of just shed a magnifying glass on was where we are from a mental illness standpoint, and even probably exacerbated some of that in some situations. And the reason I don't want to bring that topic up now for us to unpack is because I don't think we would do it justice by just talking about it for a few minutes, because I think it's a broader topic that I know Brandon has some interesting thoughts on as well. And I just want to make sure that we give it its just due. So why don't we do this? Let's bring you back another time here within the next month or so and get you to talk a little bit more about the work you are doing with diversity, inclusion, and equity. And really, I also want to unpack that some of the stuff as far as Howard Ross's book, and just talk a little bit about the impact or the influence that either he had or the kind of the work that he's done around diversity, inclusion, and equity, I think would be powerful as well. And heck, maybe we'll even have him join us for that awesome conversation. So that would all be great. But I can't thank you enough. I think Brandon just really kind of summarized the things up really well. It's as inspiring now to hear you tell that story. Every time I hear you tell it now, this being the second time, as a parent, I think it hits me so much more because I'm just thinking about the age that you were when you were observing these things. And as you pointed out, I had forgotten from the first time that piece about them telling you your mother's dead and you having to go through all of these other challenges, the roadblocks, the 92 or 96 mile journey. The whole time thinking that your mother's dead, this foundation that we all have, and so I'm just so inspired by that, because, we talk all the time on the show about the burn the ships mentality of removing all options. But you said something during this about resilience I thought was really important, is that it's not always about the teaching of resilience. Sometimes it's that embodying it. Sometimes the choice is made for you. Sometimes the ships are burned for you. You don't have that option of just being like, okay, I'm going to remove all my other plans and just focus in and dial in on this one. It's sometimes somebody is doing that for you. There's external forces that are taking away all your other options, and that forces you to either be resilient or fail or not be successcul. So I think those are really good things. And I love the fact that you're still out there spreading that word to, in your speaking engagements. Tell the folks how they could get in touch with you for some of those speaking engagements. I know that's something that you're doing now, and any other things that you can provide from a service standpoint to them, because we definitely know after this conversation that you are somebody who is the embodiment of that servant leadership as well. So how can they get in touch with you to do some of those things?
Definitely check out vitalakimana.com. That's my website. It's under construction, but it has all the contact information. It will probably remain under construction until I've pegged down, hopefully, who I am and what it is I have to offer fully. But for the most part, all my contact is there. I'm also part of Roots to Sky, which is a collective on top of Mount Storm, Oakland, Maryland. rootstosky.net is it's a sanctuary basically for people who are interested in doing the internal work, diversity and inclusion, but also like expansive transformation, transformation of your mind. And then, of course, there are other parts of my, like one experience that I'm a part of is like working with some of my clients who have the fund for the Braden James Fund, which is like on mental, like child cancer. Like those are things that are like really important to me. And then if you have a kid in high school who would like to go to the National Student Leadership Conference, the nslc.org, that's the place where I'm a leadership facilitator. And we're exploring, deep diving resiliency, empathy, communication, personality, and how really there's a way of being you can become in the world and walk through the world that is impactful for yourself and the people around you. But I will respond to any email. I'm grateful for anyone thinking of me and sending a message. I welcome it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, God bless you. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing work. And we're so honored that you were able to join us tonight. And I'm looking forward already to the next time you're on.
Truly honored. John, thank you. Brandon, thank you. You all, I felt like quite at home.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.